In here with Gardening Simplified. Today we're going to talk about food and food preservation. Now, as I start this video, first thing I want to talk about is food and food quality. I always stress growing your own food and growing it organically, not the use of pesticides. And the reason for that is these are chemicals that don't need to go in the body. And a lot of times, and especially depending on where you been raised and how much research you do and such as that, you might think that uh, these pesticides are all approved for this and that, but there's not any good studies. The studies that are normally done are done from a perspective of the manufacturer. So if they're paying for the study, you know what the results are going to be. And this is why it's so important to grow your own food so you know what's in it. Another thing is processed foods. Processed foods have a whole lot of chemicals, and if you start reading them, it might scare you from even going and buying a lot of these things. And some of you just might not be concerned. You say, well, the other's too expensive, or it takes my time, or this or that. But you can decide whether or not what you want to eat. And I'm going to talk about some ways of preservation that we use here on the poultry farm. And I'm going to talk about why we do what we do. So let's get into it. First thing I want to talk about is some of the preservation methods. Now, a common thing a lot of people do is canning. Now, canning, way back when, you could figure putting it in a can, that's the way they did a lot of it. They didn't have jars like this. They might have had some, but they did actually use tin cans. And that's where that word canning comes from. Now, there's a lot of different methods for so-called canning. And when you're doing food preservation, you might be actually heat canning something like pickled peppers or uh, cowboy peppers, something like that. Or you might actually be canning something up like these that have been dehydrated. These are tomatoes. And you might put them in a can. You might put an oxygen absorber in there. Go ahead and pull a vacuum on it, be safer. That's another method of canning. Now, a lot of times when we buy in bulk, just like our popcorn here, our popcorn will put it in jars and pull a vacuum and save them. But there's so many methods for canning stuff, and a lot of people just think about uh, maybe making syrups here. We got some strawberry syrup, and this isn't actually dated, but this is probably about 4 years old. And a lot of people worry about how long their stuff can stay on the shelf. Now, I'm not going to claim to be an expert at this because, as far as preservation and keeping on the shelf, there's safety rules that are involved. For one, if you had something that was canned like this and the seal was broken, then that tells you that it wasn't canned properly, or either the gasket leaked. A lot of times when I put something up and if I freeze dry it or something, and I might say it'll last uh, maybe 3 to 4 years. And the reason why I say that isn't that the product will go bad in 3 or 4 years. Whenever you have it in a dark storage area and it's sitting on the shelf, uh, away from sunlight, sunlight will degrade and it'll start to where it doesn't taste as good. Now, it's not going to actually, the color might fade or something like that, so it won't look as appealing. Sometimes the sun could change the flavor. So proper storage is an important part of doing your canning. But the reason why I say 3 to 4 years is the thing about when you can, the important part about it, in fact, even when you're freeze drying, is whether or not your jar stays good and sealed. Because rubber will deteriorate over a period of time, and that's the reason why you've got a safety concern with the amount of time it's stored. And sometimes, like now we have our pickles down here. The pickles, we ate 4-year-old pickles year before last because we just was finishing up our pickles, and we had put so many on the shelf that it took us a long time to go through them. Well, the flavor of the pickles were really good. The only thing that I noticed with it was that they were starting to be not quite so crisp. They were still crisp, but they were beginning not to be quite as crisp. And not that the food had gone bad. It is staying there a long time, but certain things that you can, the texture will change, and that might affect the quality. Anytime you have sugar in something, like jams, jelly, stuff like that, sugar is actually a preservative. Sugar's acidic, so that increases your shelf life. As far as the flavor will still be there, you're using, most of the time you're using berries that are acidic, blackberries or something like that. So you have a really good acid in there. And in olden times, they didn't do these the same. They hot packed these. What they did was they put their jelly in there, and then they took paraffin and poured on the top of it. Then they just put a lid on it, and it might pull a little bit of vacuum as it cools down, but it wouldn't pull very much. But that paraffin kept all the air away from the product that was in there, and so that gave it a good shelf life. And that's one reason why they did that. It was easy to access and such as that. But some products, just like here, we've got some garlic. This is about a year and a half old. This garlic that's been freeze dried, I wouldn't worry about this for even in a jar for 10 years. Long as your jar stays sealed. Garlic is a antibacterial anyway, so stuff like that you wouldn't worry about spoiling as quick. Now, some people might want to worry, but like I say, I wouldn't. Now we've got here, this is some freeze-dried cucumbers, and these are getting close to 2 years old. And now these, even though they're sealed, they do seem to be not quite so firm. They're still good. They still taste good, good flavor, but they seem not to be quite so crispy. But when I use them in salads, that's just fine. But this is just one of the preservation methods. Now, there's other methods, and the reason why, and we'll take these mushrooms here. Now, these mushrooms were freeze dried, and these right now they're about 3 years old, 3.5 years old. These should stay fine and good for 20 years. And the reason is this is in mylar. Now, mylar is different than normal plastics. The outside has got a kind of a foil cover, but it's actually the lining inside of it that this foil is bound to is mylar, and mylar doesn't let air through it. So that's the reason why when you take and freeze dry something and you put it in mylar, that's why you get 20 to 30 years of life. And they say 20 to 30, it could last a whole lot longer if it's properly processed. Now, some foods might lose the flavor, but like I say, when it's freeze dried, I think that you'd be in pretty good shape. Dehydration is one of the methods we use a lot. Peppers don't grow in the cool season, so when we got a good supply, and you can see this dust was on here, but these are over 2 years old, and they're drawing dust on the top of them. They've been up there on the shelf for a while, but there's nothing wrong with them. These are perfectly good. The flavor is going to be like it used to be. It's going to be in great shape. But but if you're talking long-term storage, Mylar is going to be your best bet. These squash, now I kind of like freeze-dried squash, mainly for the reason that when they reconstitute, we don't put a lot of water in them. We just kind of stir fry them with butter and stuff, and they tend to be a little bit more leathery, so they've got more mouthfeel. And to me, I like that texture. There's other things that you can. We've got tallow here. You find just good source for grass-fed tallow. This stuff will stay on the shelf for years and years. Now it's about a year old now, but I'm not going to worry about it if this sits here for 5-10 years. It's going to be in good shape. Like I say, the main thing is just to make sure you got a good seal on your jar. Now there's other preservation methods that besides just freeze drying and canning that's important. But one thing, now we got quite a bit of food here, and the thing about this is we grow a lot of it, so we don't have that big expense of buying it in the store. Yes, you have to have a place. Yes, you have to get started. No, you don't have to have all these big fancy tools like tillers and stuff like that to work the garden. It does help. A lot of times you can rent one, or a lot of times you'll have a neighbor that'll come over there and help you out, maybe till up a spot for you. But the important thing is, in order to have good stored food, you have to have good quality food that's worth storing, and that's, to me, that's an important thing. And we do all kinds of things. Our bees don't make a lot of honey, but we buy honey in 60-pound pails or a 5-gallon bucket, and we just put it in canning jars. And honey is one of those things that will keep for thousands of years. It's enzymes in it, keeps it where it's still good, as far as you don't have to worry about bacteria and stuff like that. In fact, that's one of the things that why they use honey so much in when you're dealing with your health and making a tonic, say for colds and stuff like that. But all this stuff, it can stay in here a long time. These are our tomato peels and pulp that's left over when we make juice. Now we've got enough of this to make soup for I don't know how long. And there's no telling how long it's going to stay there because it's been properly kept. Strawberries here, same way. But this, like I say, this is one of the things. The main thing I say is have good quality food. You need to get back to the source. You need to stop making excuses that I don't have a place to grow or this or that, because I know a lot of people, they'll get together, they'll have a community garden, they'll take and all pitch in and do the work. Now you have to find somebody that's going to do the work. You don't want one of these people that's just going to be the lazy one that they're going to ride on the cart and you're going to have to pull it. You have to have somebody that's willing to do the work. But all these things can be preserved that you grow in your garden when you grow in excess. And a lot of times when you buy bulk, like coffee. Now we buy our coffee, 5-pound bags of coffee beans, and we grind our own. But when we do that, we'll go back to honey. When I put honey on the shelf, a bucket of honey was costing about $180. Now I think it's up 100 or 270 or something like that. The price, this honey's a couple years old, but the price has really increased. So not only did I get the value of buying it in bulk and having it, I I beat inflation on that. Now, granted, when I run out, I'm going to have to buy more, and I'll have to buy it at that price if my bees aren't putting out. But that's another reason to decide to preserve your foods like that. Now, there's a lot of people that worries about things. I know I had a YouTuber talk about my freeze-dried sweet potatoes, because we put butter and cinnamon on them, brush them with butter and cinnamon, which is a small amount of fat, yes. And fat doesn't freeze dry like others, but a lot of people freeze dry steaks and they stay for a pretty good bit. They try to cook out most of the fat. But this, when it's freeze dried and it's vacuum packed, it's got an oxygen absorber, it doesn't have the environment for bacteria to grow. So when you talk about food going rancid, it's not the same depending on how you process it up. Another way of preservation is vacuum packing and freezing. Now, a lot of things, when you freeze them, sometimes the texture changes, but when you vacuum pack them, it makes a big difference on something staying good. And it's always good to label it. My wife could say what this is, looks like squash, but it was put in and wasn't dated. But we've got a lot of stuff that's been in here for years. There's bell peppers, that's quite a few years old. We have, I'm going to guess cantaloupe, but I'm not sure. It's always good to mark what's on there. It does have a mark on there, says NG, so you'd have to translate that out. But anyway, when you freeze something, you need to vacuum pack it when you freeze it, because the difference is when it's vacuum packed, there's no air in there. You don't have the problem with freezer burn. This juice here, I was cleaning out the freezer one year and I had juice that was about 8 years old. And so I decided that I'd make some wine, use it up, made some mighty good wine from that juice, even though it had been in the freezer for a long time. Now, the other thing is the temperature of your freezer plays a big part, because this stays at -10. All my freezers do. And that's a good temperature to keep stuff from degrading over time. Now, if I decided I wanted a rhubarb pie, I could just come out here and get me some rhubarb. I've got enough rhubarb I wouldn't have to worry about growing any this year, and I won't plant any. But when you harvest it and you preserve it when it's in season, it makes a big difference. But don't think when you're freezing something, don't just think, well, I'm going to put it in the freezer and it's going to keep a long time, because more often than not, you've seen, now certain things to me don't taste as good when they're frozen. Green beans is one of those. You know, even though we vacuum pack and freeze them, if it's the fact they lose some of the texture or what it is, I like them far better when they're actually pressure canned. So, and pressure canning is another method of canning your low acid vegetables. They have to be pressure canned. So you need to know that when you're doing it, as far as taking and finding which method works best. When you pressure can, you don't have to worry about freezer space if your power goes out. And we'll talk some about self-sufficiency in another video to where you can make do with that. But don't think because you live in the city and you can't grow something that you can't preserve your own food. You can buy from a local farmer that you know doesn't use pesticides. You can put that stuff up and you'll have the top quality produce when you decide to eat it. Now, we do a lot of freeze drying here, and I talk about freeze drying, and I understand there's some drawbacks to freeze drying for a lot of people, and one thing is the cost. Now, the cost of the unit, depending on which size, that's going to make a difference. But another thing that's going to make a difference is having the space for it, because these units, they get pretty big, so they take up a good amount of space. And when you're not using them, uh, they're in your way. Now, uh, I have two of them, but to me, they're well worth it. Whenever we're doing something, we've got them cranked up. You know, this week we've done uh, some harvesting and taken and used our freeze dryer. We do quite a bit on freeze drying, herbs, peppers, all kinds of stuff like that. So freeze drying is a really good method for uh, preserving your food. Now, another method, and a lot of you can do, and you don't have to have a real big uh, dehydrator. And this one, excuse the dust and stuff. It sits out here in the workshop. I leave it out here because I don't need to generate the heat inside and cause extra air conditioner running and stuff like that. So we do all it outside. Every time we get ready to use it, we start dusting it off and go for it again. But a dehydrator is ideal for food preservation. There's a lot of things you can dehydrate. Like I showed you my cherry tomatoes in there. They're wonderful in salad. They are crunchy because I don't rehydrate them. You could, I guess, but I kind of like them like a little bit of extra crunch in my salad, and the flavor is fantastic because all the water's out, so you've got a more intense flavor with them. And that's one thing as far as preserving too. And when I do them, which I've got videos for where I've done those, I'll season them uh, before I start dehydrating them. But I dehydrate mine, then I freeze dry them. That way I get all the moisture out because you got the seeds in there. It takes a little bit longer. And I'll get them completely dried, and then that way they'll have a real long storage life. I'm one of these, every time I freeze dry, I talk about the extra time that I give with uh, freeze drying. Now, most freeze dryers are set up with a 2 hour extended time. I always run mine up, especially certain things like if I'm going to powder something, or if it's like peppers and have seeds, I'll run it 10 hours. Yes, it costs more, but to me, the quality of what I have in the storage life is really important. Uh, so I have it on the shelf and I have it in good quality whenever I decide to use it. Another thing for food preservation, something that's not that expensive, you can pick these up for under $20. This is a uh, portable vacuum uh, sealer for your mason jars. Now it has, you can separate it here, and you can do large mouth jars or small mouth jars. I can show you what this one is, but it's just a cheap one I picked up off Amazon. I've been really happy with it. It's held up real good, and whenever we use it with a lot of jars a lot of times, so it's working its time. It is rechargeable, so we don't have to put batteries in it. We just plug it up with a USB and take care of it. But anyway, this is basics on food preservation. Of course, uh, these things take time. We've got hundreds of jars, if not thousands, uh, that we use, and there's just two of us. So, but we preserve, or like say we buy in bulk, so we can buy quality organic uh, supplies, and we don't have to worry about uh, having them on hand when we need them. But I think it's important that you consider your being self-sufficient as far as know your supply chain. Know that my supply chain, I walk out here to my storage and I get whatever I need to eat. We do buy some. I would have to say it's impossible to be 100% self-sufficient unless you have certain suppliers. Maybe if you trade stuff for things that you need, but like you're going to have wheat if you're going to make bread. You're going to have sugar. These things are things that you're not going to cook down as far as if you're harvesting a bunch of grain and then processing it into sugar, normally you process it into sorghum, but uh, you can get sufficient on some of that, but you're always going to have to buy something. I don't raise any type of meat besides chicken and geese. So if I want beef, I have to buy it. So I have to find a place to buy it, and then have to keep it preserved. So I have to have enough freezer space to keep it. But start working towards being self-sufficient, and the easiest way is start the gardening. Uh, you can grow your food. Just don't get out there and grow something that you're not going to like. I mean, you might grow a little something so you can try it and then know, but grow things that normal staples that you eat, maybe beans, potatoes, stuff like that. Uh, and just start out. Maybe start out with some herbs, but you can grow all kinds of food and be prepared when you grow a lot of it to preserve it. And these are a few of the methods. There are some others. And if you have a special method that you use for something that I didn't touch on today, well, please comment it in the comments. That way, other people that watch this video, they'll be able to uh, have that extra knowledge. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to see more videos on growing self-sufficiency, uh, you know, just hit that subscribe, hit the bell, select all, and give it a big thumbs up. Enjoy that gardening experience.